From government lies where the truth was finally exposed, to secret missions and horrifying projects. Welcome back to Bumblebee! Here are the top 10 government secrets that were accidentally leaked. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Lie. Thanks to a document from the National Security Agency that was declassified, many people received a confirmation of what they long believed. This is the idea that one of the two supposed North Vietnamese attacks on US ships in the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964, the attack that the president at the time, Lyndon Johnson, and his administration used to justify the massive escalation of the Vietnam War, apparently it didn't happen at all. The historical analysis conducted and declassified by the NSA revealed this all. In the article, it is noted that intelligence and defense officials who knew about the faked attack, or rather who doubted the evidence brought forward by the administration, didn't speak up because of a quote awareness that President Johnson would brook no uncertainty that could undermine his position. It's a terrifying reality, especially when we look at the war and what went on to happen from there. In our number 9 spot today, we have rabbit telepathy. This is an experiment that was originally conducted after World War II, but it wasn't brought to light until many years later, well into the 2000s. Said to have been a part of quote Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychology research that was done from the end of World War II through to the Cold Era, this is one of the most grisly and truly unbelievable experiments that were conducted. Basically, they were trying to use rabbits to communicate with submarines, which is definitely bizarre just on a regular level, but of course the way in which they conducted this experiment was wrong and inhumane and truly just very cruel. Just a little heads up, if you're sensitive to animal stuff, I would maybe just go ahead and skip over this point. Okay, there's lots more information for you on this list. So for the test, they would take a mother rabbit who had recently just had bunnies. They would keep the mother in a lab on shore, and then they would take the bunnies down with them into the submarine. Slowly, one by one, they would take the life of the bunnies, and each time they did, the mother rabbit's brain would produce a detectable and recordable reaction. Is this one of the worst things I've ever heard? Yes. What's even worse is that the report then goes on to say that other examples of quote animal telepathy research continued into the 1970s, and that it included other animals such as dogs, bears, birds, insects, and fish. I can't imagine they were, but let's just hope that the other tests weren't quite so cruel and inhumane. In our number 8 spot today, we have Operation Northwoods. This is an operation that comes from the time of the Cold War, and it has to do with the tense relationship that was seen between the United States and Cuba at the time. Operation Northwood, should it have gone forward, would have been a project that saw violence committed against US and Cuban civilians, with the blame being placed on the Cuban government. Messed up, right? These acts would include faked attacks of a high magnitude, like the hijacking of planes, the sinking of boats, some really serious stuff. They wanted to do this in order to justify an all-out war with Cuba, but thankfully some people at the time had decided that this likely wasn't the smartest or the best route to take, and the idea was scrapped. For a long time, this was hidden from the public until years later documents were revealed that showed this dark truth. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Lunik kidnapping. Don't worry, Lunik is not a person and instead is a Soviet lunar satellite that was kidnapped just for one night. This project honestly sounds like it was taken straight from a movie, and it has to do with the Great Space Race. In the early 1960s, the Soviet Union wanted to make it as clear as possible that they were winning the race to space, so they launched a multinational exhibition of their Lunik satellites, which became the first spacecraft to impact the moon's surface. And when the Luna 3 returned, it brought with it the first ever pictures of the moon's far side. It was a really big deal, and it's safe to say that the US wanted to know everything that they could about it. Of course, the satellite was heavily guarded, but it was traveling from city to city for this exhibition, so undercover CIA agents went to work. Basically, they convinced the man who drove the transport truck to get some rest at a nearby hotel. Basically, they would just look after the satellite for him while he rested. I'm sure it was a bit more complicated than this, but you get the gist. From here, the agents then took apart and photographed every single component of the thing before putting it back together and placing it back in the truck for its next tour date. There is no indication that before the operation became declassified that anyone outside of those involved knew what had happened, and I'm not gonna lie, that's a pretty hilarious plan, and the fact that it worked is both shocking and very impressive. In our number 6 spot spot today we have Operation Washtub. This operation came to light in 2014 when documents became declassified and more people could learn about this Cold War era operation. Basically, this was a covert mission that had its sights set on Alaska. The plan detailed the training of different people who lived in Alaska, like we're talking just ordinary residents. They wanted to train these people to both code and decode and a few other spying tactics, which would have been so cool. I mean, I would have wanted to be picked so badly. Not that I would have even known that it was happening, but you get what I mean. Basically, the plan was put in place in case the Soviet Union was to invade Alaska. Then these unsuspecting ordinary citizens would use their newly learned espionage techniques to get all of the intel they could and secretly relay the information to high-ranking US officials. As we now know, of course this invasion never occurred, so the contingency plan wasn't needed, but 89 lucky temporary agents were trained just for this purpose. So jealous. In our number 5 spot today, we have the cattle crimes. Okay, so these documents reveal a super grim FBI investigation that took place in the mid-1970s at the request of US Senators Floyd Haskell of Colorado and Carl Curtis of Nebraska. I guess there was some weird sort of connection between these horrific things being done to cattle across as many as 21 states. In a letter from 1975, Senator Haskell was able to identify 130 of these strange, macabre cases in Colorado alone. All of the cases were eerily similar, which is unsettling considering the details. In most cases, the cattle would have their left ear, left eye, rectum, and reproductive organ all missing, and the blood was drained from the carcass, but there was no blood on the ground around them, nor were there any footprints. How absolutely horrifying is that? Some people chose to believe that the cause for this was mysterious helicopters and UFOs, but there's a letter from Senator Curtis to the FBI that says, quote, "The series of incidents stretching from Oklahoma to Nebraska in which cattle have been dismembered in some kind of strange witchcraft cult." I'm not gonna lie, I don't think UFOs or witches did it. It wasn't until 1979 that the FBI was granted jurisdiction to begin investigating these weird happenings, and when they did, they determined that most of the instances were a result of, quote, "normal predator and scavenger activity." And while that answer sounds a little fishy, the documents went forward to reveal that not all of the instances could be accounted for. Also, this idea of it being a completely normal scenario contradicts reports that say the techniques used in these horrible instances were, quote, "very professional," and sometimes even referred to as being conducted with surgical precision. I'm sorry, but a wolf or a coyote or a bear or whatever predator you want to say did this, ripping apart its meal isn't exactly a surgically precise operation. No arrests were ever made, and while it was deemed solved, a ton of mystery still surrounds these stories to this day. In our number 4 spot today, we have Starfish Prime. This is an operation that took place in 1962 with the documents discussing the outcomes being declassified in 1989, and this operation was a joint one between the US Atomic Energy Commission and the Defense Atomic Support Agency. Basically, they detonated a thermonuclear device in the sky above the Pacific Ocean. They launched it from the Johnson Atoll using a Thor rocket, and once at an altitude of about 240 miles, they set it off, which ended up producing a yield of about 1.4 megatons. The documents show that the electromagnetic pulse was so powerful and widespread that it disabled not only most of the equipment that was set up to measure it, but it also took out streetlights and caused telephone outages in Hawaii, nearly 900 miles away. The electrons released caused an aurora that could be seen over most of the Pacific Ocean, and according to the documents, the, quote, "visible phenomena due to the burst were widespread and quite intense, and apparently was visible for days." In the end, it is said that the researchers weren't expecting such a powerful blast of electromagnetic pulse, and they also weren't anticipating that the electrons from the blast would get stuck in the Earth's own magnetic field for months, possibly even years. But alas, they did. This went on to create a radiation belt around the planet that eventually went on to disable at least 6 satellites. So that's great. Glad they did that. In our number 3 spot today, we have Operation Fast and Furious. No, this isn't another installment of the beloved franchise. This was actually a tactic that was used by the Arizona U.S. Attorney's Office and the Arizona Field Office of the United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the ATF from here on out, as they were conducting a series of sting operations from 2006 to 2011. Basically, the idea for this operation was to allow licensed firearm dealers to sell weapons to illegal buyers, hoping to track the firearms down later to Mexican cartel leaders so that they could then arrest them. So not only did this really not lead to the results that they were hoping for at all, but it actually had terrible outcomes. Many of the firearms that were being tracked have been found at crime scenes on both sides of the United States-Mexico border, and one was even found at the scene where United States Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was killed. In our number 2 spot today, we have The Warning. On Tuesday, January 28th, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger launched on live TV, but just 73 seconds into its flight, it disastrously disintegrated, taking the lives of all 7 people on board, which included high school teacher Krista McAuliffe, who was going to be the first non-military civilian in space due to the Teacher in Space program. Of course, investigations were immediately launched to figure out how this could have happened and what exactly went wrong. In fact, the president at the time, Ronald Reagan, appointed a special commission to investigate the causes, and as it turned out, the investigation report revealed that the disaster was, quote, an accident rooted in history. This basically confirmed that NASA had previously known about the problems that led to the destruction of the Challenger and the subsequent demise of the crew. The least surprised of all was perhaps engineer Robert Boisjoli, who apparently sent an inter-office memo months prior to the tragedy, warning of the exact fate the Challenger would meet should they continue to choose to launch the shuttle in such cold weather. Quote, the results would be catastrophic of the highest order, he wrote. Quote, loss of human life. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Teapot Dome scandal. Ah yes, what's a good list of secrets and government cover-ups without a good old story of bribery? Albert Fall was the Secretary of the Interior to former President Warren G. Harding, and while in this position he decided to secretly allow oil companies to tap into the Teapot Dome oil reserve in Wyoming and the Elk Hills oil reserve in California. Of course, the reason he did it is because he could make a ton of extra money doing this, like several $100,000. This all started to unravel though in 1922 when there was an expose that revealed the oil had been sold without any sort of competitive bidding. After this expose, Robert La Follette, who was a senator from Wisconsin, created an investigation into the story by the Senate Committee on Public Lands. The Attorney General at the time, Harry Dougherty, began to get some flack for not investigating this alleged corruption, so Harry turned to the FBI director to help him out. There's a lot of characters in this story. The FBI director, William J. Burns, sent an agent to Robert, the senator from Wisconsin's office, to search for anything that could be used to blackmail him into stopping the investigation into the corruption. Despite this seemingly obvious threat, Robert knew that this meant that his investigation was going to reveal something serious, which motivated him to continue on with it. In the end, the shady dealings and bribery was revealed and Albert Fall was officially exposed. This entire ordeal led to him being the first United States cabinet secretary to go to prison. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again soon. Bye!